My name is Maya Gamble Rivers, and I am the Manager of Programs and Public Engagement at the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice here at Brown University. I believe this is the 11th episode in the Center's new webinar series, This is America, which explores structures and systems rooted in anti-Black racism. I want to thank you all for joining us for this retrospective conversation with alumni from the Center's Civil Rights Movement Initiative. Created in 2015, the Civil Rights Movement Initiative, or CRMI, is an after-school program that serves students from 3 Providence public high schools. This program offers students exposure to a rigorous pre-college level curriculum and an immersive week-long trip that centers the history of the Civil Rights Movement through Black grassroots organizing and collective resistance. With the tagline, "Looking back to understand the present," CRMI serves as an opportunity for students to grapple with this history and encourage them to interrogate systems of domination and how these legacies continue to shape their lived experiences. On January 31st of 2020, the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice announced a generous $20,000 matching gift from Barbara and Tom Bale, class of 1963, to support the expansion of the Civil Rights Movement Initiative program for the 2020-2021 academic year. In just 2 short months, we met one of our many goals and raised $20,000 to match Tom and Barbara's generous gift. And this is critically important funding, which will allow Providence Public High School students to participate in CRMI program, of course, when it is safe to meet in person and travel. Again, thanks to the gift from the Bales, 2020 was dedicated to kind of restructuring the Civil Rights Movement program, which now includes a rigorous 12-week seminar that still culminates in a week-long trip to 9 cities in 6 southern states. And during the immersive trip, students will continue to meet with veterans of the movement and visit important sites such as the Center for Civil and Human Rights, the National Civil Rights Museum, and the Equal Justice Initiative. The program will continue to conclude with an annual public lunch talk, similar to what you'll see this afternoon at Brown University, where students will get to share their experience with students, faculty, and their community. I will quickly introduce our panelists that are coming from the first 3 cohorts, 2016 to 2018. First, I have Hafsat Akani, who is a recent graduate of Boston University, where she studied international relations and African American studies. She currently serves as the program manager at Leadership Brainery, a nonprofit organization committed to education equity, career access, and coalition building. She hails from Lagos, Nigeria, but spent most of her life living in Dublin, Ireland. During her undergraduate career, Hafsat was heavily involved in student life and engaged in extracurricular activities through organizations such as the Iota chapter of Delta Sigma, Theta Sorority Incorporated, and the Boston University Student Government, where she served as the first Black female student body president. She is passionate about creating a more just and equitable future and is a deep believer in using the law and community engagement as tools for societal empowerment. Rene Ferreiras is a Hope High School alum, class of 2018. She is currently a junior at Providence College. She majors in social work and minors in sociology and wants to go into psychotherapy further down in her career. Throughout high school, Rene was involved in many extracurricular activities such as Youth in Action, Planned Parenthood Stars, and Providence Youth Caucus in hopes of creating social change. Her participation in the Civil Rights Movement Initiative sparked her interest in social work due to witnessing the effects of systemic racism creating adversities for people of color from reaching their desired socioeconomic status. Her experience at a predominantly white institute is when she saw firsthand that people of color aren't provided with enough resources, support to succeed, and aren't represented enough on campus. Currently, she is a part of Providence College Diversity Outreach Committee, where she works with the Office of Admissions to recruit students from underrepresented backgrounds. She is also secretary for Women's Empowered, which is a club that promotes inclusivity and creates sisterhood for women of color on campus. Mohamedou Mbaye is a junior at Boston College. He is currently studying management with a concentration of finance and economics. On campus, he is the treasurer of the Muslim Student Association, a volunteer through Big Brother, Big Sister program, and he is also a member of Sexual Chocolate, an all-male step team. In his free time, he likes to play soccer as well as the guitar, and he also finds himself going down YouTube rabbit holes. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome all of our panelists and start with some questions that I've kind of created to guide the conversation. Later, I'll let you guys know when the Q&A is open, and so you can put your questions there, and then I will try to get through as many of them as possible. So let's get started. So much of the work of CRMI is about education. Many of us, including myself, expressed how we didn't really know much about the civil rights movement beyond Rosa Parks or Dr. King before the program. And to quote Mohamedou in his exit interview, said, "I learned more history in 1 week than I did in all of my schooling." He was a senior in high school at the time. And so the way in which this history is taught to us completely devoids Black Americans of much agency and ignores the intricacies of grassroots organizing that was central to the civil rights movement. So to begin, I was wondering if you all could speak about what you were taught about the civil rights movement, and furthermore, how did CRMI help to undo the narrative that we're still often taught in this country about the civil rights movement?
I'll go first. Thanks, Maya, for the introduction. In terms of what I was taught in high school, or just growing up, not a lot. And it's funny because I also went to a predominantly Black and brown high school. So it was even more shocking that we didn't learn a lot about the civil rights movement. I knew that, or I thought that the movement started with a man named Malcolm who had a dream. I thought that Rosa Parks, I thought that there was not much going on, right? We had significant moments in time and that was it. And I think that CRMI really gave me a deeper understanding to know that the movement was much more than that. The movement wasn't just sporadic events that were happening time and time again, but it was strategic organizing, grassroots organizing. I learned that Rosa Parks, as phenomenal as she is, was not the first Black woman to sit or to refuse to give up her seat on the bus. And in fact, it was a young girl at the age of 15, Claudette Colvin, who was the person to do that. And so for me, it was more about just gaining a deeper understanding and understanding, or just coming to terms with the fact that what we are taught in the classroom as the civil rights movement or African-American history is not actually its own separate thing, but more so it's still American history, right? And so not being able to get that in the classroom, but being able to get it through an after-school program was definitely empowering.
Yeah, kind of similar to Hafsa's experience. I also went to the same high school, and it was kind of weird because most of the way I learned about Black history the most was in my English class taught by a white man who really just pushed it as part of the curriculum. It wasn't really focused in any other areas. And so that was really interesting. So yeah, definitely the trip, it really taught me about the unsung heroes. Hafsa mentioned Claudette Colvin, and just people like that I've never heard of, and the reason why she wasn't the one, she didn't get most of the credit, because I think if I remember correctly, she was pregnant at the time, so she was a pregnant teen, so they didn't want that as the the face of the movement or whatever it may be. And just all the people that did stuff behind the behind closed doors that we didn't really get to learn about, which I really appreciated from the trip. Another thing that I really learned was about the importance of faith in the civil rights movement, because wherever we went, there was a lot of especially Christianity. When I say faith, that faith was kind of driving a lot of the movement in terms of people had it kind of bonded people together to be able to fight for the same things. And I feel it's not really as showcased when you learn about Black history. And when we got to visit these churches and these people talking about their connection to God and how that brought them closer together, and how people would go to the church and that was their place to meet up in a safe space before they can go out and do whatever they needed to do. It really emphasized that for me. And yeah, I guess also it really showed me how things are romanticized, kind of to what Hafsa was saying, in terms of even the Claudette Colvin situation, or when we went to I don't remember which city this was. I think it was Greensboro, but went to this museum and saw this KKK exhibit, and saw that once you get to see the actual suits that they wore and the people that they were hanging, it really showed how Black history is kind of romanticized in other spaces. Or even for example with Martin Luther King, they're always quoting stuff that's like super positive and like, oh, like look forward to this, like have faith in this, but they don't quote the stuff that he says about white America or, you know, the evils that he talks about. So that was really important to me, and that's what I learned on the trip as well.
Yeah, so similar to Muhammadu and Hafsat, I wasn't really taught about like more so like not the big names of the civil rights movement. So like we all know about like Martin Luther King, but in the civil rights trip, I learned about like Medgar Evers, who was also an activist fighting for the same cause. And like I learned more about Malcolm X stories, because I feel like sometimes like the curriculum tends to like deviate from talking about Malcolm X stories, since he had like such a different approach. So I learned more about that. And then I also learned like although like they were fighting for the right to vote, it was more so about fighting for like having a seat at the table and like trying to like make us more like have a level playing field compared like with other races. And I feel like I learned that we just wanted to be viewed as equal and considered equal. So it really like taught me more things than like my high school taught me.
So Rene, you just mentioned that it was like a lot about more voting, but I want to take a moment to think about voting and civics education. So throughout the program, we talk about voting rights, whether it's through learning about Freedom Summer, and you get to hear about that from SNCC veteran Roscoe Jones, or, you know, crossing the Emmett Bridge, learning about Bloody Sunday. And, you know, Bloody Sunday became a catalyst for the passing of the Voting Rights Act. And so doing really important work to push against racial discrimination in voting. And so in November, we all experienced the week-long election, and the months leading up to November 3rd and the months following. We saw voter suppression is still very real. And so wanted to know if you guys could talk about your education, whether it's like K through 12, and how did your education prepare you to be an active and engaged citizen, if at all? Did your universities do any programming to support civics education at the college level? And in what ways does the lack of civics education impact American democracy?
I guess I can go first with this one, because I have a pretty interesting story with my voting. So pretty much, I remember last semester, I like registered to vote and everything, and then, but I was kind of just like too focused in the schoolwork that, so I didn't do my mail-in. And so instead I had to like take a train to Rhode Island from Boston and go vote there. And like what my experience was, I think, I can't remember the times right, but let's say, I think it closed at like 5 or something like that. And I was there at like 4:45 and they turned me away. And I was kind of confused because they were like, oh, because there was still a line outside, but they still turned everyone away. And I was like, but I'm here before the time that you guys told me I could be here. So I didn't really understand why I was being turned away. And then I tried to like explain myself, but they still didn't let me vote. So I'm kind of upset that I didn't get to vote, even though like I registered and I took the hike there. But and then when I got home, like I was reading articles and stuff, and like I was reading about like how that shouldn't have been the case. Like I should have been allowed to still vote. And so I was a bit frustrated. So I guess it's like that kind of show, like I feel like I wasn't educated enough. Like I was educated about the situation, but not as much as I should have been. And I feel like that's very important before you go and vote. And I was kind of excited because this is my first time being able to vote, because I was too young last time. So it was just kind of upsetting that I was turned away despite being there on time and everything. And I feel like just like teaching young people about their rights when it comes to voting is really important, because pretty much all I know about voting was that I can choose whichever candidate I wanted and I have to be 18 or above, but I didn't really know the implications behind that. So I feel like that's very important. I guess like the lack of civic education just like kind of it doesn't like show the true importance of being part of a democracy. And I guess like back in high school, my experience was a lot of kids were always like, why am I going to vote if my vote doesn't count anyway? Or like, one little vote's not going to change the outcome of the whole system. So I guess like helping young people deviate from that mindset and like showing that every little step counts, I feel like that's very important. But yeah, that was my little story that I just wanted to share, because hopefully I'll vote in 2024. Yeah.
So Boston University prides itself on we've adopted, or I guess not we, because I'm graduated at this point, but they adopt and use the philosophy of common ground as taught by Dr. Howard Thurman. And so that philosophy of common ground is pretty much so about getting different people from shared backgrounds to come together as a collective community. And so the HTC for short does a lot of programming, and the university tries to support the HTC in that endeavor. Students have to go through orientation, and at orientation, the HTC is very much so centered throughout all of it. I think the thing with civic engagement is that there are moments in time when we choose to engage in civics, right? But it's not woven throughout our entire education. So if you guys have ever had orientation, you know how crazy it is, right? There's so much information going in one ear and out the other. And so while you're exposed to the HTC and learning about civic engagement, learning about how to get more involved, you kind of have the option to never see the HTC or interact with it again. Especially if you're a student who's like pre-med, or you're going to be a doctor, you probably, if it's not in your peripheral and you tries to make it that way, then you won't engage with it. And so that being said, I guess that answers the whole question about what your university does, right? I think that one can say that a university could do more. I think it'd be different if classes were mandatory. As Maya mentioned, I was president of BU student government. And one of the things that's really passionate to me is voting. For full context, I can't vote because I'm still an Irish citizen, so I'm not an American citizen, but I can't vote in this country. And it really kind of like with Mohamedou's story and everything, it really kind of just gets to me when I hear that students don't know what they should know about voting, because there really is no reason and there is no excuse as to why we shouldn't be educating students K through 12, forget when you turn 18, about how to register to vote and how to vote, and also knowing your rights. Knowing your rights is super important, because had Mohamedou been educated in the way that he should have been, he would have never walked away at 4:45 p.m., right? And so one of the ways that I would say that, we were able to do that was through the BU Votes campaign and working with other schools around the Boston area. And so BU Votes was started by one of the professors, and she kind of had a small coalition, and we joined on board with student government. And it was basically to just get students to register to vote, to learn about how they should vote, what they should do, and like when to do it. And so it was a series of 3 different phases throughout the year. I think one in the beginning of the semester in January, one towards the end, and then one in the fall, so that they wouldn't just be getting the information at once, but it would be in your face constantly. And then working with the Boston Intercollegiate Government, we were able to get a whole bunch of other schools involved, such as Northeastern, so NU Votes, Emmanuel Votes, and so on and so forth. But I think that BU Votes is great, right? And it's great to do things at the collegiate level. And I feel like far too often society depends on students learning things at the collegiate level, but you also need to learn these things throughout the K through 12 level, right? Because the harsh reality of the whole situation is that a lot of students, especially in minoritized communities, don't move on to higher education. And if they don't move on to higher education to learn about those issues, then they don't know, right? And so I think that civic engagement isn't necessarily something that should just happen in college, but it's something that should happen throughout your entire education system.
Quickly, 2 follow-up questions. The first one being, a lot of you, by the time you graduate high school, you're 18. So like, my question is, where are you getting your information from about voting? Like, are you having conversations with parents or relatives? And also, outside of just like voting, what are some other areas of civic engagement that you think is really important for young people to be engaged in, right? Because it's not just about voting for the next president, but your state officials, or like different issues surrounding education or things like that. So I'd wonder if you can talk, and then Dave, Rene, we can start with you if you'd like.
If like looking back at like my past, like my education so far, I honestly like didn't learn about like the history like of voting till the CRMI trip, and even like I learned more, like in my knowledge increased as soon as I got to college. Like I learned more about how like they had to take these like hard tests in order to vote, and how much like obstacles they had to like overcome in order to like get that right to vote. And I'm sorry, what was the other question? Sorry.
The 2 follow-up questions that I had was kind of, your 18, you're now old enough to vote. Like, where were you getting information about where to vote, how to vote, why you do it? Were you having conversations with parents, relatives? Is it something that your family took seriously? And then the other question was, what are some other areas of civics engagement that you think are important for young people to engage with? And so I guess if you want to get your thoughts together, Hafsat or Mohamedou, do you want to answer those follow-up questions?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of like in my family, like voting is not really talked about much. You know, my mom's from the Gambia, and she became a citizen like I think in 2016 or something like that. So yeah, she just recently, I think she voted in the last election, but she didn't really talk about it in the house like that, in the household. And that by the time I was in high school, she just like showed us the I voted sticker, and that was pretty much about it. So that's in terms of my household, it's not really emphasized like that. So I don't really have that. I kind of have to like find the information on my own. And I guess one good resource for me was a mentor that I had who, so through my step team, Sexual Chocolate, we have like this alumni connection thing. And we had like a one-on-one mentoring program. And my mentor was really like passionate about voting and making sure that I'm registered. So I remember he asked me, "Are you registered to vote?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I'm registered to vote," because when I got my license, they asked me if I wanted to register, and I just did it right on the spot. So then he was like, "Okay, go right now and go to the portal and show me that you're registered." So I go in, and it said I'm not registered. So I was kind of panicking. Mind you, this was like a week or something before election day, whatever. So I was kind of panicking, and turns out it's just because I accidentally spelled my name wrong in the thing. So then like, yeah, he was like pushing me, like, make sure you're registered. Here's what you have to do. And obviously it might be a bit too late to mail in, but make sure you do like go into Providence and vote and blah, blah, blah. So he kind of like, I was going to do it anyway, but because the way he was persistent about it, I was like, yeah, like I'm definitely going to go vote and stuff like that. So I guess that was a good resource for me in terms of like getting the motivation to vote. But obviously I didn't really go deep into the specifics, as you can tell from my case. I guess to answer the other question about like local voting, to be honest, I've never taken local voting seriously, just because the way I get my information, I don't really like, I normally get news about bigger picture stuff. So I actually don't really know my local representatives like that. And I'm starting to find that importance now, because me and my group of friends, we talked about it and we're like, yo, have you ever voted for like mayor or governor or senate or whatever? And we were all like, nah, like we don't even really look into that. I kind of just like put it in Rhode Island's hands. But that's something I'm trying to look more into, because like with me, a lot of times if the information doesn't find me, I have a tough time finding it, just because there's just so many things going on right now. So yeah, hopefully in the future I will be voting local, but as of right now, I haven't really looked into that.
Piggybacking off Mohamedou, up until my sophomore year of college, I didn't understand the importance of voting at the local level. I was a journalism major at the time, and one of my assignments was to cover something that was happening in the community. And so I chose to cover an election polling site. It was a super boring day. However, I learned a lot. And then I also learned about what the Electoral College is, and my mind was blown. And about how when you actually vote, you're not actually clicking, or you're not actually checking off the president, you're actually checking off your local representatives who are going to vote for the president, which for me was, I was like, why is this even a thing? And then obviously I did a little bit more research, but I think school was an exposure for me to understand that. And also social media. I don't know if you all are on social media, but TikTok and Instagram in particular around November were crazy. Every time I logged in and I was on Instagram, it would just say, vote, are you registered to vote? Did you vote? It was really a lot, but I think that it was a really smart way of doing the social justice work in terms of like Instagram's part, because that's where young people are, right? That's where they spend most of their time, and it makes the most sense. So besides school and social media, there really isn't much of an outlet in terms of me learning about voting and so on. But to answer your other question about just civic engagement in general and what that looks like, I think just creating and working with other students to create collective spaces has been a really big part of that for me. And in particular, learning through CRMI the importance of grassroots organizing and learning about the importance of education. And so being very involved with different organizations on campus to educate, in particular the Black community, because they're the most, I just, in many ways, I would say that the Black community just is often marginalized and we're often undereducated in terms of the information, right? There's a plethora of information out there, but somehow we always are missing when those conversations are happening. And so whether it's about the importance of knowing how to negotiate your finances or budgeting or basically things that you learn to do throughout life, but you just don't know how to do, or even the importance of Black History Month. Why is it Black History Month? Why do we have why not a year? Why not every day, right? So community engagement and community education has been really important for me in that aspect, both in organizing with other students and then also attending from different mentors and students and so on and forth.
Basically similar to what Hafsat said, like most of my knowledge that I got from like the last presidential race was on social media. And sadly, like Muhammadu, I couldn't partake in the voting as well. So hopefully next time I will. Yeah, so for me, one thing that I really like, since I go to Providence College, we actually, students are required to take a civics engagement course. And I feel like that's actually important because especially in like a PWI, I feel like some classmates of mine don't have the right knowledge and about like the history that goes into like African-American history and like the civil rights movement and stuff like that. So I really appreciate that PC makes that a requirement. And for me, I think also students should be educated on the policies that they could, on policies like in Rhode Island, like even like the small policies, because I had to take a social work policy class where we had to actually come up with like sorry, I'm a little nervous. We had to come up with like something we wanted to change. So for example, we came up with an example of school supplies should be free for Providence College graduates. And we had to come up with like obstacles that can come up with the policy. And it was just a great way of understanding like what goes into like policies. Yeah.
Kind of want to move into, I mean, Hafsat earlier mentioned Malcolm X, I believe it's you, and it's not something we really talk about. So really thinking about nonviolence and violence against BIPOC communities. And so, 2 weeks ago, we held another This is America conversation with students, a teacher, and community organizer in Providence about the effects of COVID-19 on education. And one thing that we discussed was how Blackness and violence against Black, Indigenous, and people of color did not stop just because we were in the middle of a global pandemic. And so, during the summer of 2020, videos circulated of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd on social media. Police murdered Breonna Taylor in her home. And so much of the narrative and practice of the civil rights movement is centered and prioritizes nonviolence. However, throughout time, including during the civil rights movement, we see how Black bodies are just constantly met with violence, even in the most peaceful and nonviolent protests, right? And so I think one thing that I've realized as, staff and as a chaperone is that many students in the program express or go through these moments where they're just very angry when they learn certain histories or certain aspects of this history and see the violence. I remember, I think one time, I think it was Hafsat's cohort. She's like, you didn't show us any pictures of Emmett Till, but you go on this trip and you see pictures of him everywhere in museums. And so I guess my question for you is, how do you make a sense of this tension between violence and nonviolence with events even from the last decade or even the last year, right? And how do you process and allow yourself to feel those emotions, but also move forward? Is there anything specifically that the movement has taught you about kind of the violence that Black bodies experience on the regular?
I'll start and I'll relate it to what Mohammadu said about faith, right? And I think that faith can come in many different ways, but having hope or just belief that something will change has been one of the things that I've learned and have tried to emulate in my life. from CRMI, we're not going through the same things today, but we are going through different things. And whether they be, I don't know, people make the argument it's worse, it's better. I don't know what it is, but it's not good, right? And so I think that the one thing that's been a constant is me emulating the freedom songs. One of the things that we did on the trip a lot was just sing. I'm not good at singing. I wouldn't hire me to do anything, but I think that being able to express yourself through song and music was a very big part of the movement. And understanding what the words "we shall overcome" actually mean. And in no way, shape, or form do I think that those words need to stop being sung because we are not in the 1960s anymore. They still apply to this day. And so definitely music has been a catharsis for me. So has writing. And whether that's writing and journaling and just being angry in my journal, or that's writing articles and publishing them and hoping people will read them and, and understand. But faith has been very much so moving. And I think that kind of going back to your whole point about the Emmett Till paintings, that was our cohort. And I think it was me that said it to you because and I think it was in North Carolina too, when we had seen the photos of Emmett Till's body just battered and brutalized, and his mom refused to have a closed casket ceremony because she wanted the world to see what they had done to her son's body. And I think that like today, sometimes we get very complacent in hiding and not seeing and not confronting what's happened. It's like we see it, it's a news article, but we keep scrolling, right? Or we see it, it's happened and we forget about it. And then when something else happens, it's like, oh, history keeps repeating itself. But then no, not really. History doesn't really, it evolves. It doesn't repeat itself. It literally evolves into other things. And so to the extent that I can, I think that I've been trying to not just shut emotions away when things happen, right? I think that this past summer was particularly difficult because all I saw all over social media was everything. You couldn't hide. And it's also a pandemic, so there really isn't much else to do. But forcing yourself, if you are able to understand what that means, let yourself feel those emotions and channel that into writing and not just like locking away the key and, locking the door and throwing away the key.
Yeah, kind of like what Hafsat said. She said something about like letting yourself feel. And I guess like that's something that happens to me a lot because I feel like when I hear about these new situations happening, injustice around the world or in this country or wherever it may be, I have a lag time personally. Like, let's say I'm on Instagram and I see a case about so-and-so, the police did so-and-so. My initial reaction is, oh my God, not again. But what I'll do is I'll save it. I'll press that save button on Instagram and I'll come back to it later on. Because I need a bit of a lag time to just like, ease myself, process. And then I'll go do research about what actually happened later on that day or maybe the next day. So for me personally, I feel like that helps me. Like there's a bit of a lag time. Like I've seen what's happened. I've gotten the basic information, but let me go make myself feel better, then come back to this and see like what went into it, what were the implications and stuff like that. And I guess like from there, like mine normally I have a group chat with all the people I lived with last year, and we're all like Black and brown students. And we all lived together last year. And so whenever something like this comes up, we always hit each other up like, hey, how are you guys feeling about this? Like what is this making you think about, or about whatever it may be? And then we just have discussions there. And I feel like that's a good way because like as young people, we kind of feel like we can't really impact many things. So it's like, okay, I can't go and change the police system. I can't go and, I mean, I can donate, but how much can I really donate and stuff? So like, even though just the conversations we have, like kind of gives us a sense of like, okay, this is staying among us, but we're at least doing something to help each other, like help each other get through this process or the time. So like, that's a really important aspect to me. And I also, with music as well, like Hafsat mentioned, I play the guitar. So sometimes I'll just start playing guitar. And even if the song doesn't have to relate to anything that's going on, I'll just like, it would just help. It was just a good distractor for me and like, make me feel at peace. Or like, I'll listen to like strong artists. Like you know, like I might throw on some John Legend because like John Legend's a great artist, and you know, like it makes me think about Black excellence in a sense, kind of like how a lot of young women listen to Beyonce, like something like that, even if it's not relating to the issue that I just witnessed or that I'm reading about. And yeah, so I just like channel my energy through there. And another thing other than music is also comedy. I just like watch comedians, and like that kind of helps me, like, you know, lift my spirits in a sense.
You ready?
Yeah, for me, it's honestly been an ongoing struggle to like how I deal with my emotions with that situation, with those situations. Like before, like I used to kind of feel like numb to it, like similar to what Muhammad would say. Like I'll see it on the like my TL or something like that, or on Twitter, and I'll like be like, okay, of course this happened. This like always happens. But like one way I've been trying to like channel it is like kind of like expressing myself more. Cause I feel like I also had that breakthrough in the trip when I went to the motel where Martin Luther King was assassinated. That's when I actually had like my first breakdown, because it was just like, it was just too much. Because I do this thing where I try to hold it in just because I feel like no change is gonna come, but I have to like, I try to change myself to get out of that mindset. And I feel like something I also do is I, like Maya mentioned in my bio, I'm a part of like Women Empowered, so that's for women of color on campus, and I usually vent to them a lot, and we talked about like all the barriers that we are going to have to like persevere through and how we can overcome it. So I just feel like expressing yourself, and similar to what Hafsat said, I also do journal, and that's just been also a way to like release like any emotions I have.
So I do have a follow-up question for all of you, right? You're talking about the ways in which you try to manage kind of the feelings. And so one of the questions that I had was really about like action, or, you know, you process the emotion, then what? So in what ways are you moving causes that are important to you forward? And what are some causes that you're currently tackling and or want to tackle?
Yeah, here on, I guess in terms of like ways I'm moving things forward, here on campus we have this thing. Here at Boston College, we have this thing called Dedicated Intellectuals of the People, which is just like a group of like Black and brown like men of color that come together and just talk about certain issues, and like we then like try to implement them on campus. So like the topics vary. Like sometimes it's about how to stop or combat toxic masculinity, or you know, like how to build Black wealth and learn about the financial system, whatever it may be, but just relating to Black men and men of color. And then like also through my step team, our step team was like, the history of our step team was that it was all black male step team at first. Now we've kind of diversified, but like we always try to push each other to go to certain things, because here on campus we've noticed a trend that like when certain things happen, when there's like an event or like a demonstration or whatever it may be, the Black women are always at the forefront of it, and then the Black men just kind of like don't show up, or if they do show up, they just won't really engage. So we've been trying to like get Black men to show up to these things and support, you know, our sisters in the movement or whatever it may be. So that's something we've been really working on. And like an example was recently there's been an incident at my school where, so we have this thing called the Mochi cultural learning experience, which is like freshman year, students of color and from different ethnic backgrounds live on the same floor. Or so there's a guy's floor and then a women's floor as well. So the women's floor got vandalized by like just three white men were just walking around and like threw all the trash cans, ripped down signs and stuff like that. And that's something, and they're still kind of grieving through that. And people are very outraged because, like, for example, the board, like the school's calling it vandalism rather than a hate crime. And like, there's just a lot of emotions going on. So one of the members of my team, like he's really into art. So he put on this event where it's like a paint night type of thing, but like in solidarity with that floor, the MLE floor. So like we went there, like I tried to paint this thing of Maya Angelou, but it didn't work out. But anyways, so we were just like kind of just, you know, showing empathy through art, and we're trying to get more Black men to come to that with us, because we realized that normally they're not there when we're in these situations. And lastly, I guess another thing I'm really passionate about working on is certain issues regarding Black Muslims, because like you said in my bio, I'm in the Muslim Student Association, and right now I'm the treasurer, but there's not really that many Black Muslims here on campus. And like, I guess in those identities, we're both minorities. Like Muslims aren't really that represented in America, neither are Black people. So we've been trying to figure out ways to help do that. And I have a friend who's doing this like TV series. It's called Black Muslim TV. Check it out on Instagram. But she like interviews Black Muslims and like asks them about their experience and how they deal with being a Black Muslim in America. And I've been helping her with that. And also we've done a fundraiser to like send money to Muslim countries and like to help Muslim youth in Nigeria, Somalia, and other Muslim countries, which I was really passionate about this past semester. And we're also partnering with this group called Charity Water that gives like finds clean water for places that don't have it. You know, like they build wells and stuff like that. And the Muslim Student Association is kind of trying to help bring those resources to predominantly Black Muslim countries, especially in Africa. So that's something I've been trying to move forward and work on. But yeah.
There are many issues I'm very passionate about, but I will say that the one that I'm working on most closely right now is equity. And I'm doing that through my job at Leadership Brainry. And I think you can think about equity in any way that you want, right? Because there are many different things in society that need to be more equitable. But one of them is in particular is education. Especially last summer, after it felt like it was wave after wave of Black bodies being murdered. I think that for me, it really made me question my leadership and what exactly I want to do and how I want to impact people. And protesting is great. I'm a very big fan of protesting, but also understanding that not every protest needs to take place on the street, but some can take place in the courtroom, some can take place in the classroom. But far too often do we not have enough brown, Black, and whatever you want to call, like minoritized communities, minoritized students going into higher level education. They're not sitting at the table. They don't have the seats. They don't know how to get to the table. They're not equipped to sort of understand how they can fight for themselves necessarily. And so it's really just been, I guess, since I graduated, working with the Leadership Brainry and understanding and finding ways to cultivate and empower student leaders so that they can sit at the table, because it goes hand in hand. You can't just have people marching on the streets. You need to have people sitting at the table, and you need to have offices and spaces and companies that mirror the diversity of the country. And you can't just have all white people sitting at the table, because that does nothing for the country. That's where we are today, right? And so it's really more so about making equitable spaces, and in particular distinguishing like the difference between equality and equity. It's not just giving everyone $10,000, but more so if you understand that this community has been marginalized for a specific amount of time, how do you put them on the same playing field? So that's what I've been doing right now, and that's what I've been really passionate about.
So something I've been passionate about is basically diversifying more our campus, because we are a predominantly white institute. There's been times where I'm sitting in the classroom and I'm like the only student of color in there. So that's why I'm part of the diversity outreach committee, where we actually go to public schools and we try to like recruit them to come to PC. And we do like events like NIFT, which is Night in Friartown, where they get to sleep over and actually like sleep over campus and actually like get like a view of how campus is, just so like they don't have the culture shock when they do come. So that's why it's important, like they get to sit into classrooms and stuff. And something I'm also like trying to push forward is like making sure like women of color on campus have their own space, because I feel like we do like go through a lot, and like there's like many like kind of like trauma that we unravel trauma that we do have. And I feel like by like having a space where women of color on campus can come together and just vent, I feel like that's super important. And there's definitely more things I want to tackle. And like, so for example, like me being a social work major, I do want to be able to provide like resources to families who can't afford resources, like, and like aren't able to do enough stuff. So being able to like provide them with that is what I really want to push forward to.
Rene, one thing you have mentioned is attending a predominantly white institution, and past that you talked about quality education. And so, during our workshops, we explore Jim Crow in education. You read and learn about the Little Rock Nine, and on the trip, you get to meet and speak with Dr. Sybil Hampton, who was the first African-American student to complete all of her high school years and graduate from Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. But one thing that stands out for me with her story is that she shares her experience continuing to integrate this all-white school during following the lost year, which is like 68 to 69, when all the schools in Little Rock shut down to avoid integration. But Dr. Hampton speaks about the importance of getting a good education, right? More so than integration, right? And so this is by no means a comparison, but you all attend or attended a predominantly white institution, and Brown itself is a PWI. And so I was wondering if you could all talk about what that experience has been like for you, because to this day in America, it's still common belief and accepted that, the best education resides in PWIs. And so wondering, how did this reality play a role in your decision? And how do we continue to push against this belief? I know, Kamala Harris and other folks are starting to really push HBCUs and Black excellence and intelligence there, but wonder if you guys could talk about that.
Overused phrase that the best education resides in PWIs, because I think people equate good education with money, right? And we see PWIs and they are well-funded, but there's a history behind their funding, right? Even when we talk about Brown University and how the university itself was built by slaves, right? Like, so there's a reason why these universities have the money they have the money they do today. When I look at my friends who went to HBCUs, whether it be Clark Atlanta or Spelman or Morehouse or wherever they went, and I look at the quality of education or just the type of people they are now, especially as we've graduated and the workforces they're going into as well. And I look at where I am today, I don't really see a difference in terms of quality of education. I don't think that I'm smarter than my friends. I don't think that I'm dumber than my friends, but more so we both got good education, right? The difference, I think, is their confidence level. Not saying I'm not confident, but it's different at an HBCU. I didn't even go to one, but I can see the difference, right? That whole idea of Black excellence is truly bred at HBCUs. And I'm not saying that HBCU students don't have to struggle, right? Because I think that everyone goes through different struggles in their own capacities and their own rights. But I think it's a little bit more mentally draining to be at a PWI as a Black student, right? Whether it's you fighting for the student activities office to recognize why you need to celebrate an event, why you need to celebrate African Diaspora Culture Night, or whether it's sitting at a diversity and inclusion event because there was a racially charged incident on campus and you are now the only Black student in the classroom and you are the sole advocate for all Black people in America, right? And so I do think that in HBCU, the pressure is taken off of you because there are more people who look like you. I'm not going to say it's easier at an HBCU because, again, I think that there are different struggles we all go through. But in terms of just the mental capacity that one has to endure being the only one or in many of their classrooms is just hard. And I think that it breeds a different level of confidence when you are constantly being empowered by other Black people. So the whole idea of a great education is at a PWI, I really disagree with it because I think great education is where you can foster community. I don't think that there are bad schools or bad colleges, but it's more so, and I think that's what colleges are also realizing and competing against because everyone can have amazing professors. Professors hop from school to school to school. It's more about cultivating that community and making or allowing the students to feel comfortable enough for them to thrive in their education. And I think HBCUs do a really good job of doing that just by the nature of the fact that they do, majority of their populations are Black and Brown students.
Yeah, I guess like my experience here at a PWI, like Hafsat said, I don't necessarily like go around thinking I'm getting like premium education. And like definitely like what she said about good education normally comes from schools with a lot of money. Like I could see that firsthand. But I don't really feel like it makes my education any better than anyone else's. But I guess like in terms of like, so here at BC, there, being at a PWI as a Black student does have its challenges. And personally, like, I feel like the position I'm in right now is that I'm normally the one helping people. Like I don't even know how to explain this, but like certain things, when certain things happen, like, you know, certain incidents happen on campus that are racially charged or whatever it may be, I'm always the one looking out to see if people are okay rather than thinking about how I feel about it. And I guess it's just because I personally, like, I have a good sense of dealing with things internally. And, but I'm just like, I look out for people that might need some validation. So like, I guess like that's been like that's been a challenge here for people, for a lot of people. And I guess like a a great way to deal with it is to like just make sure you keep going and keep doing what you're here to do. Because I remember my freshman year, there was this incident where a student that was like drunk one night started like vandalizing his dorm room and like wrote in marker like Black people are the plague and or something of that nature. And it kind of went like all over social media and everything, and people were outraged. And at the time I was taking this class that was called From Black Lives Matter to Me Too, which is like trying kind of showing the intersectionality between the Black Lives Matter movement and the Me Too movement and like the implications. So, and the professor who was there, Professor Jean Charles, said like you can protest and you can be outraged as much as you can, because you can't tell people how to grieve, but make sure you're still succeeding in everything you're doing, because they want to pretty much they do these things to see us crumble and to see us fall, but we have to like continue to show that we're being resilient and excellent and succeed in everything we do. And so that's like something that I kind of keep in mind. Like, I'm not going to let your hatred ruin my success, if that makes sense. And I guess another thing that is really important to me here is just like kind of being trailblazers in things we do. So like, and occupying spaces that people like us normally don't occupy. Like even if it's like something like last summer I was an orientation leader. There's not always a lot of Black orientation leaders, but me being a Black orientation leader and having Black students in my groups like can show them like, hey, you can occupy the space as well when you get here and when you're older, or you know, just like, you know, getting certain internships and then showing the younger class like how I went about that process, how I got there, and just like telling them like, okay, like I'm occupying the space where I'm a minority, but you can do it, I can do it, you can do it. And once we all keep doing it, it's good. The dynamics might look different in the future. So, and it'll make later generations comfortable in these spaces. So I feel like that's something that's very important. And like, I guess also like just dialogue. Like I said, like I have a group of friends that I always talk to, and we talk about, sometimes we'll just like pull up to each other's rooms and talk about like any topic, like, you know, creating Black wealth, or like, you know, looking out for each other after graduation and things like that. And I feel like that's very important for us. Like it's like a huge safety net for us, because a lot of my friends aren't going into like, we're going to careers that aren't really Black centered. Like I'm going into finance, and like one of my friends is going into marketing and sales, and it's like we're trying to figure out ways to like keep our authenticity and our Blackness in those spaces and within each other, because it's not going to be always present with us, and it's easy to get lost when you get into the real world. So like, we just have we go to each other to talk about these things and like, you know, give each other a safety net, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's been really helpful for me.
My experience at a PWI, so I don't think the education is different, but I do, like, similar to what Hafsa said and Mohamedou, like the experience you have is different. So like a quick story time. There was once me and my friend were walking on campus at 3:00 in the morning, and we're just going back to our dorm, and security happens to stop us and wanted like proof of identification to prove that we did go to PC, while there was a white student walking right in front of us and he didn't even question her. So I feel like things like that, I feel like also like staff should also be educated, because we are living on a campus where security has certain biasness towards certain students. Like there's been many stories about it. I feel like, yeah, I feel like also I'm still dealing with like the whole culture shock thing. Being the only person of color in classes is sometimes a little difficult, but like similar to what Muhammad said, just like talking about it and just making sure like you have your own space where you don't feel excluded in a PWI is really important.
So I want to thank you all for answering the questions that I had presented, but also going to now open up Q&A. But as I'm going through, I just want to have one question to kind of start the conversation. A lighthearted question, because I feel like we're pretty deep and pretty heavy. And so throughout the trip, you learned about a lot of people outside of the big names who were critical to the civil rights movement. And so I was wondering if you could share someone that you learned about that you still carry with you today, and in what ways did their involvement impact you, or why does that person stay with you?
Someone for me who stayed with me was, you mentioned him before, was Roscoe Jones. He was a SLIC member, and we actually went to his favorite like diner in Mississippi. And like something that like honestly like stays in my head is how he said the quote, "I almost got killed for you." I think that's like kind of like reminds me that the movement is still not over. Like we still have to fight 2 times harder just compared to like the white race and stuff like that. So I feel like just knowing that everything we do is like another step for like African Americans as a whole, or like people of color. But I think, yeah, I feel like that quote just always gets me. Like, so anytime I don't want to do an assignment, I just kind of remind myself that I don't want to push myself back because I'm basically pushing future generations back. So.
Do you remember the story that led up to him saying that? Do you want to explain that, or do you not?
I know he was talking about the importance of like education. It's like, it happened so long ago, but yeah, he like touched upon those topics.
So just to fill audience in, so Roscoe Jones is a SNCC veteran who was critical to Freedom Summer, so not just registering people to vote, but also education initiatives that were taking place during that summer to really help Black students get ahead academically. And one night, he was supposed to be in a car with Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner, but last minute got a call to hang back because they needed some help with something related to Freedom Summer. So he stays back in Mississippi, but the other 3 men were killed that night. And so it's this very tragic story of how kind of his life was saved by this phone call and someone needing help back in Mississippi with the Freedom schools. And so he didn't go. And so that's what Rene is talking about when he said, "I almost died for you," because he was supposed to be in that car. Ppsd or Mohammedan? Someone that you still carry with you from the trip, or it can even be from the workshop, something.
I'll say Dr. Sybil Hampton. Not that I didn't know what to do with my education before meeting her, but she made me think about what to do with my education. I think that the idea of going to college is something that's definitely pushed, and the idea of going to school is pushed, but maybe I'll just give a little bit of backstory. So we learned about the Little Rock Nine, which was amazing because they were high school students at the time, basically doing the undone and integrating Central High. Then we also read Melba Pattillo Bell's, right? Her book, we read an excerpt from her book about what that experience was like. But then meeting Dr. Sybil Hampton, it hit a little different. I don't know if I do know. There's a difference between reading an article and reading a book and speaking to someone who went through it. And I think that's one of the things that I appreciated most about CRMI. It's not just being in these physical spaces, but also learning from these trailblazers, learning from these people who literally put their lives on the line for us, and hearing her talk about how she fought every single day to get an education and how she fought every single day to go to class. And hearing how it's not more so just the matter of fighting, because, okay, you're fighting and you're there, but also just refusing to be defeated and what you can do with that education afterward. And so that for me is something it was in my head throughout high school. It was in my head throughout college. It's still in my head every single day, but more so it's good to just fight to get an education, but what do you want to do with it? What good will you do with it in the world? And it doesn't matter what industry you're going into, you can always do good no matter what industry you are in. You can always give back at the community level, and giving back doesn't have to be monetary, but more so, are you educating the community? What are you doing for your people? Because kind of like what Mohamedou said, like, I think that depending on the industry you go into, it's hard and it's easy to lose yourself and it's hard to stay grounded and centered, but more so never forgetting the past, right? And I think that's exactly what CRMI does. There's a reason why, like, what we experienced today was not just like a surprise, right? There are moments that led up to what we experienced today. And when you learn about the history of what it takes to get an education, it makes you appreciate it more. When you learn about how people fought to vote, it makes you appreciate your right to vote a little bit more. And so Dr. Hampton definitely allowed me to see that. And I'm very, very appreciative for that.
I was also going to say Dr. Hampton. And for her, it was also like, obviously mainly like, you know, her story, her being the first person to complete the whole 4 years or whatever, and like how she took education so seriously was inspiring, but also she was just a sweetheart. So I just really enjoyed like meeting her. And I had a little conversation with her as well. But I was trying to remember this lady's name, but I was thinking of Catherine Burke Brooks.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was her name. And she was, I think if I remember correctly, she was part of the Freedom Riders. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so it was a really cool experience meeting her, because I think we met her in a church basement, if I remember. And mm-hmm. she was there with her mugshot and from when she was younger, and she got arrested or put in police custody. And, you know, just like after that, like she was talking about how after that happened, like that didn't really stop her from fighting for what she believed in. And it's just like, it was kind of inspiring, because like people are facing these so many different obstacles and nothing really deters them from fighting for what they believed in. So it kind of made me think like, okay, what is my excuse then? Or like, what are our excuses for not doing certain things, especially, and that kind of really emphasized the importance of youth in the civil rights movement, because like younger people really didn't have as much to lose. You know, they didn't have kids to worry about, they didn't have a mortgage they tried to pay off or whatever it may be. And like how the utilization of young people was just like a key, like an essential part of helping the movement go along. So like that was something that really stuck with me. And lastly, I would say they weren't part of the civil rights movement, but we went to, I can't remember the name, but it was that little school, after school program in Mississippi that like was inside a house. I can't remember what it was called.
Sunflower County Freedom Project.
Yeah. So we were like, one of my favorite parts of the trip was just talking to the kids that were there. And like, obviously they weren't part of the movement. They were like 10, 12 years old or whatever it may be. And like, you know, it was really surprising, because they opened up a lot for people that they just met. And I was just taking in all the information, and like some of them were talking about how some of their teachers still, sadly, like some teachers still use hitting as a form of discipline and stuff like that. Or like some of them like talk about certain negative things their teachers say about them. But when they were there, they were just so happy and positive. And it was like, it just showed me like, well, these young children are very strong in the sense that like they face this discrimination every day, but they go after school, they go home and they, you know, spend time with each other, help each other grow, and like, you know, do all these things together and maintaining a positive attitude. And it was just like very inspiring for me as well. Kind of like, what is my excuse again? So yeah.
Are there any efforts in your home community to understand and address mental health, affordable housing, criminal justice reform, and economic equality? And I know this might be a little complicated because for 4 years you become a part of another community, whether it's Boston, Rene, you're still in Providence. So I guess if you guys want to take that question.
I can't speak much to Providence. I think a lot of my life, this sounds really dramatic, but my life kind of changed after CRMI, and I did it my senior year, because I don't think that I was in a space where I could even think about being active and engaged in advocating for those issues as a young person. At the age of 17, until I learned about other young people at the age of 17 doing those things. And so I think a lot of my activism took place in college. I think the biggest thing that that makes me think of is affordable housing. And this really came about around COVID-19. And even beforehand, I know we talked about just food insecurity in Boston, in particular with college students. Not every student is on a meal plan. And when we did the research, we found out that like a lot of students are actually food insecure, and in particular, Black and Brown students, in addition to the fact that a lot of people are like, they're not secure in terms of housing. And COVID definitely brought that to light. And so that came with writing petitions to Mayor Walsh in terms of homeowners in the Boston area increasing rent around COVID, which was just crazy because no one had money and the world was in a pandemic. And I think it's kind of what you said, like when COVID happened, it didn't mean that Black and Brown students or Black and Brown bodies didn't stop struggling, but the difficulties that they had faced prior were honestly just amplified. And so, yeah, I think it's more so learning and gaining the tools to be able to advocate for things like that, in particular food insecurity. I think that the impact could be greater in the future, right? But those are two things that I was very passionate about in undergrad, and then also still to today, especially during an era where it's just harder at this point because everyone is also suffering because of COVID.
Yeah, I don't have an answer because like although like I do go to Providence College, I feel like one thing that PC does struggle with is that it tends to keep their students like in a bubble. Like we aren't really like knowledgeable of what's going on, like of the poverty and like everything that's going on in the OT 908 area. Yeah, so I don't really have an answer for that. Yeah.
I mean, I think that is an answer, right? That like you don't ever have to be confronted with it, right? Because you live in this bubble that's PC. And I think that's a similar narrative that we hear at Brown, right? It's like once you're on College Hill, like you don't have to deal with the rest of the city or interact with the rest of the city. And it is a problem that a lot of students are trying to combat and work against, and actually being members and part of the Providence community.
Like I would have to agree because like there's literally, we have a BC bubble as well. And that's because we're kind of isolated from Boston a little bit. But I guess like on campus though, I do like see a lot of like mental health initiatives. You know, just like we are like, it ranges from like scope because like there's little things like we always get a newsletter from the Office of Health Promotions talking about, hey, do you want to come in and do you need a session, or like do you need to talk to someone? How's your mental health lately? Stuff like that. And then like on top of that, there's been like a lot of like initiatives to help students deal with like the amount of, you know, their course load and everything they have to balance, and like, you know, showing them different ways to implement self-care. And I guess there's this office called the BAIC, which is I'm not going to say the acronym, but it's just like a center for students of color to go to. And they're always like, you know, promoting mental health and, you know, giving out care packages and stuff like that. And I feel like it kind of helps me feel at home a little bit because kind of like day running and half set, I'm not knowledgeable of things back in Providence because I only really go there like 2 or 3 times a semester. So yeah, that's pretty much what I've witnessed.
Thank you. This next question is from Catherine from Leadership Brainery. In what ways did CRMI assist in sparking how you balance your career aspirations with your activism?
In many ways. I think the biggest way would be on the visit to EJI, which is the Equal Justice Initiative. At EJI, I mean, I think there were many moments throughout the trip that kind of got me thinking about life and what I wanted to do. And so at EJI, we met, and I think all 3 cohorts did as well, Mr. Anthony Ray Hinton, who was a Black man who was basically arrested and put on death row for almost 30 years for a crime he did not commit. And learning about his whole arrest and how the people who arrested him literally told him, doesn't matter if you did it or not, they're going to convict you because you are a Black man. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And so learning about EJI and their efforts to basically put an end to like mass incarceration in America and the death penalty was just really inspiring, because there are many different ways that we can take action today. But I think that even as Mohamedou said, and I know that this is not where you were going with it when you said it, but there is a reason why Black women are more at the forefront than Black men. Statistically, there is actual evidence to showcase that, whether it be because a lot of Black men in our society are imprisoned. Almost one in every three Black men will end up in prison at some point in their lives. Like that's a jarring statistic, but it's true. And so I think that also just in terms of what it does for the rest of society, right? When Black men don't see other Black men aspiring for things, they're not the ones at the forefront a lot of the time. And so just hearing about that story and hearing and understanding and drawing parallels to different issues and understanding that everything is literally integrated. You can't talk about education without talking about housing, without talking about criminal justice reform. It really led me to think more about law and how to use that as a tool to basically make the world a more equitable and just place. And so I entered college as a journalism major, and I remember telling Maya this. I was like, and I'm gonna study African American studies. And then I got to BU and there was no major, and I was like, okay, so we'll take the minor because that's all they've got. And then getting into journalism, my whole thing was I wanted to tell the stories of people like Mr. Hinton. I wanted to show the world everything that was going on, because it's easy to ignore things when you don't see it. You can't know what you don't know, and you can't unlearn what you do learn. But I think over time, just being more involved with EJI and understanding after that initial meeting with Mr. Hinton, just put law more at the forefront of my mind, and also minoring in African American studies and learning more about, Thurgood Marshall and all the African American attorneys who helped fight for cases that helped advance Black rights. It got me thinking about using the law as like a tool. So that's how it helped me.
Yeah, so kind of like how I mentioned earlier, the career path I'm heading towards, or like the major I'm studying, doesn't really focus on, civil issues or like Black people or, Black history or anything like that, because I'm going into finance. But I guess like one thing that I did learn is that like you can always be an activist despite what your career is, and like always like finding ways to be involved. So like, for example, like Maya mentioned in my bio, I do a Big Brother Big Sister program, but like this Big Brother Big Sister program is specifically targeted towards young Black students in the Boston area, in Mattapan, which is a neighborhood in Boston. So all the students are Black students, and we've been trying to find more, BC volunteers that are Black students as well, because a lot of these young Black students are getting paired with, white college students that really don't know their struggles at that level. But I feel like it's still a useful resource for them. Or like, just making sure that I'm involved in some way, whether it's through volunteering, whether it's through, helping people out with their initiatives. And like, it kind of helped me realize that like, it's okay to have a career that's not, as socially involved, as long as you're making those steps to be socially involved yourself. So it's something I always keep in the back of my mind.
For me, it definitely sparked me being into social work and a sociology major, because I really wanted to know more about like the history and like why things are the way they are. So like I learned about like with my sociology courses, I learned about like redlining and how that's like there's like certain communities that are purposely like have less resources than compared to other white communities, and how that leads into another cycle about education and whether you can seek higher education because you aren't provided with enough resources. So that kind of led me, like I really wanted to be involved and like actually help, like basically what I said, just kind of give on to the generations that after me, and just being able to like provide them with resources and just like being able
Before we go, one last question. So I guess to close out this talk. If you were to speak to Ppsd, which is Providence Public School Board, based on your experience in CRMI, what recommendations would you give to them to improve the curriculum and address issues of racial justice and culturally relevant pedagogy?
For me, I feel like I would want like the PPSD school board, just like they have a tendency to leave, like to keep it pretty in a way. So like, for example, like when I first learned about like Christopher Columbus, like they told me that he was discovering America, but they didn't tell me the millions, like the thousands of people he slaughtered in his journey. And I also learned that, I think it was the museum. I learned that, I forgot the museum name.
National Civil Rights Museum?
Yeah, it was that one. And that's when I learned about like how I actually learned more about my identity and started figuring out that there were slaves in Dominican Republic. And in that trip, it like got me in touch with my Afro-Latinidad and stuff. So now like I identify as an Afro-Latina by learning more stuff about it. And I feel like they have to like educate more, like how they have there's a system that's created to keep minorities down in a way. And I feel like by educating them, they'll be more prepared to like go into the world and like see like all the racial injustices and like how we have a problem with equity and like, yeah, just being more so like aware of everything around them.
I would say to not only teach the civil rights movement properly, right? But because I think that's pretty obvious that that would be an ask, but also not just the civil rights movement, but also learning about the transatlantic slave trade. Like if they didn't, Black people just weren't, oppressed magically. We appeared here, we were brought here, right? And understanding that history and not waiting until February to teach Black history either is a big thing, but also not just because I think, and I'm not going to do all this. I know there are a lot of private schools in Rhode Island as well, but a lot of the public schools, so the inner city public schools in Rhode Island are predominantly Black or brown. And so you don't have to teach civil rights movement or the slave trade to just the inner city public high schools, but more so the charter school students need to know them. And to whatever extent they can, because I know school boards talk even with private independent schools as well, to what effort that they're educating other students, because white students need to know these things as well. When they get to college, when we all get to college, a lot of us are not going to prioritize African-American studies or Africana studies. And so it's understanding the full extent of the history, but then also I would weave community building into that conversation, because sometimes I think that it's very easy to see the civil rights movement as like a Black and white war, but more so one of the things that I did learn is, I forget who it was exactly, but it was an activist that we met with, and she talked about how she was like, yeah, we have white friends helping us. And, and so it's not just, but more so just the community building aspect of it and preparing students to learn how to use the skills that they, just learn how to use the skills that, or teach them the skills that they will need to be able to have conversations with people who don't just look like them. And I think that those are the things that people during the civil rights movement did, right? It's like, okay, we're obviously fighting for rights, but how do you work together as one with members of your community and members not of your community as well? So teaching the full history, teaching it properly this time, and then also how to community build.
I kind of have similar views to what Rene and Hafsat said, but one thing I feel like a Black history class should be a requirement, because if I remember correctly, when I was in high school, I think we had to take 2 or 3 years of history. I can't remember, but it was just like modern and world history, where it's like, and then they had a Black history section for like half a chapter that was there. And I guess like my main thing is that I don't like the way they romanticize it. Like when we're learning about Black history, they'll tell us, okay, the Harlem Renaissance was a cool time for jazz or whatever. But I'm like, okay, that's cool and all, but like, where's the, the discrimination, the slavery and all that stuff? Or like, they'll just be like, okay, Jackie Robinson was the first Black Major League Baseball player. And like, well, I'm happy for Jackie Robinson, but like, can you tell me about other stuff, like, so I feel like it's a bit too romanticized for my liking. And that's why the trip was important to me. But yeah, I feel like at least one history class that's solely a Black history class for the whole semester or the whole year should be implemented. Even if it starts off as an elective and then slowly becomes a requirement, because yeah, like I don't really think like modern and world history is important, but like at a certain time, at a certain point, it just gets like very repetitive.
We're pushing the end of our time, and so I want to thank panelists for sharing your experience and your words of wisdom with us all. And I want to send a very happy birthday wish to Hafsat, whose birthday is tomorrow. I also hope that folks that are still with us, that you'll join us for our next This is America talk on February 23rd at 3:30. It's a conversation with students, scholars, and artists as they think about the work that they're doing around memorials and commemoration in Providence. So again, thank you for attending this conversation with alumni from the Civil Rights Movement Initiative, and we'll see you next time.